Hello, friends, and welcome to the Voices of Life, a ministry of the Church for Life. I'm Pastor David, and today's Did You Know segment takes us deep into one of the most meaningful symbols of American sacrifice, the Purple Heart. Most people know the Purple Heart as the medal awarded to service members wounded or killed in combat. But did you know its story begins long before the modern military, all the way back to 1782 with General George Washington himself. Washington created something called the Badge of Military Merit, a simple purple heart made of cloth or silk, and he intended it for the ordinary soldier, not the officers, not the elite, but the men who showed unusual gallantry, extraordinary fidelity, and essential service to a young nation fighting for its freedom. And Washington said something remarkable. He declared, "The road to glory is a patriot army, and a free country is thus open to all." In other words, honor wasn't reserved for rank or status. It belonged to character, courage, and merit. Over time, that early badge faded from use until 1932, when it was revived on the 200th anniversary of Washington's birth. It became the Purple Heart we recognize today, a symbol of sacrifice, service, and the cost of defending liberty. So in this episode, we're going to explore the origins, the meaning, and the legacy of this historic decoration, and why its message still speaks powerfully to us today. I'm Pastor David, and this is Voices of Life. Did you know? Let's begin.
3 sergeants, a piece of purple cloth, and a general who believed that glory should be available to anyone willing to earn it. That moment, August 7th, 1782, in Newburgh, New York, quietly planted the seed for what would become America's most recognized military decoration. Today, we're tracing the full arc of Washington's Badge of Military Merit, what it actually was, who received it, and how it transformed and changed into the modern Purple Heart. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why the original award was far more radical than most people realize, and why the distinction between then and now actually matters. I've got someone here who has really dug into this history, so let's get into it. What's the thing about this story that most people completely get wrong?
The biggest misconception is that the Badge of Military Merit was basically an early version of a wound decoration. People hear Purple Heart and they assume Washington was honoring soldiers who got hurt in battle. But that's not what the original order said at all.
Wait, so it wasn't about being wounded?
Not primarily, no. Washington's general orders from August 7th, 1782 specifically said the badge would recognize unusual gallantry, extraordinary fidelity, and this is the key phrase, essential service in any way. That's a remarkably broad mandate. It was fundamentally an award for exceptional military merit, full stop.
So the modern Purple Heart, which is specifically for being wounded or killed in enemy action, is actually a narrower award than what Washington originally created.
Exactly. And that distinction is historically significant. The two awards share a name and a shape, but their purposes have genuinely shifted over time. We'll get into how that happened, but first, let's set the scene, because the context of when Washington created this matters a lot.
Right. So where are we in the war at this point?
It's August 1782. The British had already surrendered at Yorktown back in October 1781, so the major fighting was effectively over. But the war hadn't formally ended yet. Washington's Continental Army was still in the field, still encamped at Newburgh, New York, and Washington was dealing with a very real problem. How do you keep soldiers motivated, disciplined, and loyal when the big battles are behind you but the peace treaty hasn't been signed?
That's a tough spot. The adrenaline is gone, but the job isn't done. Exactly. And Washington's response was to issue general orders that created 2 new forms of military recognition. One was a badge for enlisted men and non-commissioned officers who had completed 3 or 6 years of honorable service, basically a longevity award. The second was the Badge of Military Merit, for what he called a singularly meritorious action. And that second one is the ancestor of today's Purple Heart. And what did the badge actually look like? Because I think people picture the metal medal we know today.
Yeah, it was nothing like that. Washington's order described it as the figure of a heart in purple cloth, or silk, edged with narrow lace or binding. It was literally a purple heart-shaped piece of fabric that you wore on your uniform over the left breast. No metal, no enamel, no profile of Washington on the front, just cloth.
That's kind of striking, actually. Something that simple carrying that much weight.
And the weight was very intentional, because here's the part of this story that I think is genuinely radical. For 1782, Washington specifically designed this award for enlisted soldiers and non-commissioned officers. Not officers, not the aristocratic class, the guys at the bottom of the military hierarchy.
Which was basically unheard of in European armies at the time, right?
Completely unheard of. The U.S. Army Center of Military History notes that the badge specifically honored the lower ranks at a time when decorations were essentially unknown to enlisted soldiers in European armies. The general practice in Europe was to honor high-ranking officers who had achieved victory. Washington was deliberately breaking from that tradition.
And he was pretty explicit about that philosophy.
He was. His general orders concluded with this line: "The road to glory in a patriot army and a free country is thus open to all." That's not just a nice sentiment, it's a direct statement that military distinction should be based on merit, courage, and service, not on rank or social status. For 1782, that's a genuinely democratic idea.
It's almost like he was making a philosophical argument through a military decoration.
That's a really good way to put it. And the badge came with some concrete privileges that reinforced that argument. Recipients had their name, regiment, and meritorious action recorded in what Washington called a Book of Merit, and they were permitted to pass guards and sentinels without being challenged, which was a privilege normally reserved for officers.
Wait, so a sergeant with this badge could walk past a checkpoint the same way a commissioned officer could?
Exactly, which in the rigid hierarchy of an 18th century army is a pretty significant statement. Washington was essentially saying, this man's demonstrated merit earns him the same respect as rank. The badge wasn't just a piece of cloth, it was a status elevation.
And the Book of Merit is interesting too. That's almost like a permanent institutional record. Not just, here's your award, good job, but your name and what you did will be written down.
Right, it was meant to create a lasting record of exceptional service. Washington was trying to build something with permanence, which makes it all the more ironic that the Book of Merit was eventually lost, and the badge itself fell into disuse after the Revolution.
Oh, the Book of Merit was actually lost?
It was, and the decoration largely disappeared with it. For roughly 150 years, Washington's Badge of Military Merit was essentially forgotten as an active military award, which is a wild thing to consider. The ancestor of America's most recognized military decoration just went dormant.
Before we get to the revival, I want to stay with the original recipients for a minute, because you mentioned there were only 3 verified people who actually received this badge.
3. That's it. Sergeant Elijah Churchill of the 2nd Continental Dragoons, Sergeant William Brown of the 5th Connecticut Regiment, and Sergeant Daniel Bissell of the 2nd Connecticut Regiment. All 3 were from Connecticut. Washington personally presented the first 2, Churchill and Brown, on May 3, 1783, at the Newburgh headquarters. Bissell received his on June 10, 1783.
And their stories are actually pretty different from each other.
Very different, and that's exactly the point. Elijah Churchill was recognized for his conduct during raids on Long Island. That's closer to the battlefield gallantry we might associate with a military decoration. William Brown distinguished himself during the attack on British defenses at Yorktown. But then there's Daniel Bissell, and his case is the one that really illustrates how broadly Washington defined merit.
What did Bissell do?
He posed as a deserter. Under Washington's direct orders, Bissell infiltrated the city of New York from August 1781 to September 1782, over a year, gathering intelligence and relaying it back to the Continental Command. According to the U.S. Army Center of Military History, he was essentially running a long-term spy operation.
So he spent over a year pretending to have abandoned his country while actually serving it.
And that's exactly why his case matters so much historically. It proves beyond any doubt that Washington's Badge of Military Merit was never restricted to battleful heroism or combat wounds. Extraordinary fidelity and essential service in any way, Bissell's mission was the living definition of that.
It's a completely different kind of courage than charging a redoubt.
Completely different, and Washington recognized both. That's the breadth of the original vision. 3 recipients, 3 different kinds of exceptional service, all honored under the same badge.
So after those 3 awards in 1783, the badge just stops?
It stops. The Revolutionary War ends, the Continental Army disbands, and Washington's badge goes with it. The young United States, as the Sons of Liberty Museum notes, was actually somewhat suspicious of standing armies and European military pageantry. There was a deliberate distancing from the elaborate orders and decorations that characterized Old World armies, so formal military decorations just weren't a priority for the new republic.
Which is kind of ironic, given that Washington had just created something specifically designed to be un-European.
That's a great irony. The very thing that made the badge radical, its democratic, merit-based philosophy, got swept up in the broader American skepticism of military ceremony, and so it sat dormant for about 150 years.
Until World War I changes the equation.
World War I is when the conversation starts again. On October 10th, 1927, Army Chief of Staff General Charles P. Summerall directed that a draft bill be sent to Congress to, quote, revive the badge of military merit. But the effort stalled. The bill was withdrawn in January 1928.
So close.
So close. But Summerall's successor picked it up. General Douglas MacArthur confidentially reopened work on a new design in January 1931. And the timing was deliberate. 1932 was the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth, and MacArthur wanted to revive the decoration as a tribute to Washington's memory.
So the revival was essentially a birthday present to Washington.
In a sense, yes. On February 22nd, 1932, Washington's 200th birthday, the War Department officially announced the creation of what was now called the Purple Heart. An Army heraldic specialist named Elizabeth Will designed the new medal, which featured a profile of Washington on the front. The connection to the original badge was explicit. Same name, same heart shape, same color.
But the purpose had shifted.
Significantly. The modern Purple Heart, as defined by current military regulations, is awarded to members of the U.S. Armed Forces who are wounded or killed as a result of enemy action. That's the core criterion. It's also been expanded over time to include injuries from international terrorist attacks after 1973 and certain peacekeeping operations. But the fundamental focus is combat wounds and death, which is a much narrower purpose than Washington's original essential service in any way.
And there's something worth noting about how the modern award works differently from most other decorations.
Right, this is actually a pretty unique feature. The Purple Heart differs from virtually all other military decorations in that a service member is not recommended for it. If you meet the criteria, wounded or killed by enemy action, with medical documentation, you are entitled to it. It's almost automatic in that sense. No one has to advocate for you.
Which is a very different process from something like the Medal of Honor, where there's a whole nomination and review chain.
Completely different. And the scale of the modern award reflects that. According to military.com, more than 1.8 million Purple Hearts have been awarded across American conflicts, with especially large numbers for World War II, Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Compare that to 3 recipients in Washington's original version.
3 to 1.8 million. That's a staggering transformation.
It really is. And it reflects how the nature of American warfare changed. The scale of conflicts, the number of service members involved, the kinds of injuries being recognized. The Purple Heart became a way of acknowledging a specific category of sacrifice that the country wanted to formally honor.
I want to go back to something you said earlier about the criteria as being narrower now. Do you think that's a loss? Like, is something missing from Washington's original vision?
That's a genuinely interesting question. I think the modern Purple Heart honors something real and important, the specific sacrifice of being wounded or killed by an enemy. That deserves recognition. But Washington's original vision was capturing something different, the idea that merit, fidelity, and essential service in any form should be honored. Bissell's spy mission would not qualify for a modern Purple Heart, and yet Washington considered it among the most meritorious actions of the war.
So in a way, the modern award is more specific, but also more limited in what it sees as honorable.
You could argue that. Washington's framework was explicitly about character, courage, fidelity, essential service. The modern framework is about a specific category of physical sacrifice. Both are legitimate forms of honor, but they're honoring different things. The name and the shape connect them, but the philosophy has evolved.
And the modern award did eventually stop being given for meritorious service altogether, right? That changed during World War II.
Correct. When the Purple Heart was revived in 1932, it was initially awarded for both meritorious service and combat wounds. But starting December 3rd, 1942, the Purple Heart was discontinued for meritorious service. The Legion of Merit was created to fill that role. From that point on, the Purple Heart became exclusively a wound and death decoration. That's the final step in the transformation away from Washington's original intent.
So the full journey is 1782 Broad Merit Award for Common Soldiers, falls dormant, revived in 1932 with a nod to Washington, then narrowed again in 1942 to specifically honor combat wounds. 3 distinct phases.
That's a clean way to frame it. And each phase reflects something about what America valued at that moment: the revolutionary ideal of democratic merit, the World War II era need to formally recognize the sheer scale of combat sacrifice, and the institutional desire to separate different kinds of honor into different awards.
There's something almost poetic about the fact that the Book of Merit, the record Washington wanted to keep of every recipient's name and action, was lost. And then the badge itself was lost for 150 years. And yet the idea survived. The idea survived because Washington put it in writing, and those general orders are preserved. The National Archives Founders Online project has Washington's actual August 7th, 1782 general orders. You can read his exact words.
The road to glory in a patriot army and a free country is thus open to all. That sentence outlasted the badge, outlasted the Book of Merit, and eventually pulled the whole thing back into existence in 1932.
That's a remarkable through line. One sentence written in 1782 that essentially kept an idea alive long enough to be revived 150 years later.
And it's worth noting that Washington explicitly intended the order to be permanent. His general orders stated that the award is also to have retrospect to the earliest stages of the war and to be considered as a permanent one. He was trying to build something lasting. It just took a century and a half for the institution to catch up.
So, when you step back from all of this, the cloth badge, the 3 sergeants, the 150-year gap, the revival, the 1.8 million modern recipients, what's the thread that actually connects all of it?
The thread is the conviction that ordinary service members deserve formal recognition. Washington was fighting against the European assumption that honor belonged to officers and aristocrats. The modern Purple Heart, whatever its differences from the original, is still fundamentally saying, this person's sacrifice matters and the country sees it. That's Washington's idea, even if the specific criteria have changed.
And the fact that it's awarded in the name of the president, that's a direct line back to Washington as commander-in-chief, personally handing those badges to Churchill and Brown in 1783.
Exactly. The personal dimension of the original award, Washington himself presenting it, is echoed in the modern version being awarded in the name of the president. There's a continuity of authority there that's intentional.
Here's what I keep coming back to, though. The modern Purple Heart is awarded for something that happened to you, being wounded by an enemy. Washington's badge was awarded for something you chose to do, extraordinary fidelity, essential service, unusual gallantry. That's a fundamentally different relationship between the soldier and the honor.
That's a sharp observation, and I don't think it diminishes either award. They're honoring different dimensions of service. But you're right that Washington's framework was more about agency and character. Bissell chose to spend over a year undercover. Churchill chose to lead those raids. Brown chose to assault that redoubt. The badge was recognizing a decision, not just an outcome.
Which makes the modern Purple Heart almost more tragic in a way. It's recognizing something that was done to a soldier, not something they chose.
And that's exactly why it carries such weight. The wound or death is the evidence of the sacrifice, not the measure of the choice. Both frameworks are trying to say, we see what you gave. They're just seeing different things.
So here's what this really comes down to. In 1782, Washington looked at his army, exhausted, underpaid, largely forgotten by the public, and decided that the common soldier deserved to be seen. Not just the generals, not just the officers. The carpenter from Connecticut who led a raid on Long Island. The man who spent a year pretending to be a traitor so his country could win. Washington put their names in a book and gave them a piece of purple cloth and said, "Glory is open to all."
And 244 years later, that idea is still alive. The shape changed from cloth to metal. The criteria narrowed from broad merit to combat wounds. The scale went from 3 recipients to over 1.8 million. But the underlying conviction that the sacrifice of ordinary service members deserves formal, permanent recognition, that's Washington's contribution, and it never really went away.
And if you want to trace it all the way back to its source, Washington's actual general orders from August 7th, 1782 are preserved by the National Archives Founders Online Project. You can read his exact words. That's not a small thing. The founding document of America's oldest military decoration is publicly accessible.
Which is fitting, actually. Washington wanted the Book of Merit to be a permanent record. The book was lost, but the orders survived. The record exists, just not in the form he imagined.
3 sergeants, a piece of purple cloth, a line about glory being open to all, and an idea that outlasted the badge, outlasted the book, outlasted 150 years of silence, and came back. That's the story of the Purple Heart, and it's a better story than most people know.
Thank you for joining me today. The story of the Purple Heart reminds us that honor is never an accident. It is the fruit of courage, of sacrifice, and the willingness to serve when the cost is high and the path is steep. From Washington's simple cloth heart to the medal carried by today's warriors, the message has remained the same. Merit matters, character matters, and the ordinary soldier is never ordinary in the eyes of a grateful nation. As we reflect on history, may we carry a deeper appreciation for every man and woman who have borne the wounds of freedom. And may we remember that liberty is preserved not only by great leaders, but by everyday patriots whose faithfulness shapes the destiny of nations. I'm Pastor David. Thank you for being part of the Voices of Life journey. I look forward to walking with you into our next episode as we continue exploring stories that formed America and the values that sustained her.